And so now I'll invite Jay Paul to take the stage, and then I'll mute myself.
Great. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Adam. Thanks, Kalyani. That's really fun to see that project. Yeah, I'm really excited to be with you today and share some ideas around systems thinking and a big idea of how we align our design practice with sort of our complex reality. And so just by way of background, I'm a service designer originally, and then for the last 10 years, this has kind of been my profile. I studied with Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby at the Royal College of Art on the Design Interactions course. And then for the last 7 years, I've been teaching on the service design course there at the RCA. I also teach at the School of Critical Design, which is an organization we've set up to teach speculative design in organizational settings. So to skill up companies and design teams and others to be able to use speculative design to create impact within organizations. And then the other side is as a designer getting to work with organizations to actually implement service design, speculative design work to try to have impact in different spaces. So sort of teaching and practice as two sides. At Neeley Worldwide, we've had a chance to work in a lot of different spaces with both speculative design and critical design. From the future of mobility, we've worked in healthcare and worked on the world's first virtual hospital, big, beautiful hospital outside of St. Louis. 300 doctors and nurses, no patients, all virtual care, telemedicine being delivered throughout the area. Have worked with the UK government, the Policy Lab, looking at shifting treatment or shifting expenditure from the treatment of homelessness to preventing homelessness. But just to say that have had a chance to explore service design and speculative design in a lot of different industries within a lot of different organizations and kind of see how it works over the last 10 years. And so as background to, I guess, the problem or the thing that I've been kind of excited about, I know it's kind of lame to quote yourself, but I realized just today as I was refreshing these slides that the first time I said this in a presentation was 11 years ago. And it seemed a weird thing to say then and quite startling, but now I feel like it's something that maybe everyone would agree with. But I believe that our current design and business practices will destroy everything we know. So the very way that we go about solving problems, identifying problems, addressing them, the things that we value are actually the reasons that we're facing many of the types of problems we are today. And one of the problems is that there is a disconnect between those practices and our complex reality or the world that we live in. And so generally when we design, we're taught to identify a problem. We narrow down the scope to something we can understand, that we have enough resources to address, that our company is or business or client is interested in, and then we solve for that problem. And we put it back. Sorry, guys. Looks like it cut out for 1 second.
And you're back.
Great. I'll start up again here. Great. So one of the reasons that is, again, is we identify a problem. We narrow down to the scope till it's something that we can kind of understand. We have enough resources to address. And then we solve for that problem. And we put that solution back into the world. We're celebrated for it. The company makes money. We win awards. But in reality, we have no idea what we've done because we put that solution back into an infinitely complex world that has a number of interactions at many degrees of separation that we're completely oblivious to. And so we don't actually know if what we've done is good or bad or what the knock-on effects are. And the externalities, the unintended consequences of our design, those knock-on effects are sort of endless. And the optimization for parts is not an optimization for everything, actually. And by creating an individual optimization, in many cases, we're actually making the overall system worse. So you can think about climate change, the obesity epidemic, global financial instability. the housing crisis that we had years ago. All of these are the cumulative impact of our optimizations of parts. And there's a concept called computational irreducibility, which means that the entire system is the computation, that you can't actually throw out bits of information and abstract it and simplify the system and just solve for part of it. When you do that, your solution is, does not fit or work when you put it back into the complex reality of the entire computation. And so I've been really interested in how we solve this problem. One idea that I think hits on it is Paul Virilio, the philosopher, suggested the invention of the ship was also the invention of the shipwreck. So, and this is true with everything we design. Any intervention, anything that we put out into the world, we're actually creating more shipwrecks. And so I actually believe that we need a whole new kind of design. We need a whole new way of approaching these types of problems that better fits with our complex reality and with the type of complex systems that we actually exist within. And so new kind of design has been an exploration over the last 10 years to try to understand what this new way of approaching this reality looks like. And so I'll just share with you today two parts of this, a set of principles, and then three practices or ways of going about our work that sort of shift the way we look at these problems. So in terms of principles, I've got 7 to think about, and these are sort of acknowledgements that have to be made about the space that we're working within. The first is anytime we consider anything less than everything, we are missing something. Every time you draw a circle around something and say, this is the space we're working in, that is false. Anytime we sort of can finish our consideration or say, this is the domain we're working in, that is false. Everything is interconnected. Nothing exists in isolation, and so we're always missing bits of information as we go about our work. 2, I just sort of hit on there. Nothing can be isolated from anything because it's always connected to everything. Everything is interconnected. Anything we do, even if it's multiple degrees of separation, will have an impact in some way, and it's we're just not very often paying attention to those interactions. Principle 3 is good and bad is bad and good, and often we can't tell the difference. To call something good or bad is a value judgment, often based on our frame of reference. And so as we shift that frame of reference or look at it from another point of view, that value changes. And so it's really uncertain. It's really hard to tell what is good and what is bad. The radical success and celebration of one company is the death of an entire industry and the new types of struggles for families in other places. And there's always this real tension between what is actually good and what is better. Anytime we do something, we don't know exactly what we've done. Because of this complexity and because of so much of the system being or we're operating sort of blind to, when we do put out an intervention, we're unaware of what the actual impact of this is. And often it can take a very long time to see that, or it can take work by journalists or others to reveal other parts of the system that have been affected by our decisions. But we're always sort of operating blind in terms of the impact of our interventions. We'll never know everything and never even know everything we don't know. So this is sort of the known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, or known unknowns, unknown unknowns. That we're always operating in spaces, even as our knowledge or understanding of the system grows, we're always operating with missing information and spaces that we're unaware of. We'll never know everything that will happen tomorrow until tomorrow. So all of our predictions, all of our predictions are based on simplifications of the entire system. So the only way to know exactly what will happen tomorrow is actually let the entire system run until tomorrow. And so there's a hesitancy that we have with all of our predictions, and a sort of uncertainty that is always there. And the final idea is the sort of theory of everything applied to everything is our only hope of saving everything. That actually, to address these things, we kind of have to understand the entirety of the system. That's the only way to actually avoid these types of shipwrecks that we're constantly introducing. So a lot of people say, well, this is nuts. And I now don't know how to design anymore. And I actually, when I was first developing these, I sort of went into depression for a couple of months, because I thought, well, all action is hopeless then, because I'm always in this this tension, and will always be causing, operating in a state of sort of obscured view, and not knowing what my impacts will be, and creating these shipwrecks. And so over time, I've come to identify ways of moving forward, and that actually there are huge opportunities here, and that even if the aspiration of some of these principles, the reverse, to know everything, is not possible, the very attempt radically shifts the way we design and leads to new kinds of value and new ways forward. So I'll share with you 3 principles now and some examples of each of these. So the first idea is to consider everything. In every project that you do, the attempt should be to consider everything, and to acknowledge that anytime you stop your research or your background understanding of the problem, you're leaving a lot of information out of that problem. A few years ago, this was a project, Anatomy of an AI System. I'm sure many of you have seen this, from Kate Crawford and Vlad and Joler. This is a beautiful representation of all of the systems that are part of the Amazon Echo environment. So from the human operator, the domestic infrastructure, the internet infrastructure, the storage, text to speech, the skills, all of the systems that are involved, from the data banks and the data exploitation. I think it starts at raw materials and it ends up with disposal of these components and the geological process, sort of deep time. It tries to be completely holistic. And this won the Design of the Year award in 2018 for the Design Museum in London. It's a beautiful project. For me, this is tragic. I think the project is beautiful, but what is tragic is that should be our baseline. Actually, I believe it's this type of understanding of the entire system and frame that we're operating in that allows us then to make interventions within the system. And think about, when is the last time you actually worked in a system where you understood it or had mapped out the complexity of that system in this way? So that's kind of my belief, that considering everything means that we move to these sorts of understandings and representations of the spaces we're working in before we intervene. And that's one way to begin to avoid some of the problems that we're currently facing. Another idea is to take universal responsibility. So once you've seen the entire system, you now have to be responsible not just for the immediate concerns of the business or client or the goal of the design project that you've undertaken. You're responsible now for every impact and knock-on impact of that design, no matter how many degrees of separation from your original intent. And that, there is no limited liability. We're talking about unlimited liability. You are liable for every impact of your design throughout the entirety of the system, intended or unintended. And so an example of a project like that, a few years ago, we've been working on a project called Night Night Everyone. And the idea is that when we create a website or an app, the business has a goal. I'm exploiting someone's attention to generate value for my organization, but also to provide value for the individual, which is great. Hopefully that's a useful exchange and a valuable exchange for both parties. But there's a point at which, in the evening, that actually the value I'm providing to the individual is less than the value they could receive from going to bed. And so Night Night Everyone is a single line of code that you can drop into your website, and at a certain time then in the evening, it puts the website to sleep. It says, it's late, nothing we can offer you is more important than your sleep. Sleep well, sweet dreams, and we'll catch you in the morning. If people really need the site, they can click through to use it and explore it. But the idea is that we have to, as a designer, I have to acknowledge that trade-off, that I can't exploit someone's attention in a way that is detrimental to their own health, because if I take universal responsibility, I'm responsible for the entirety of that individual's well-being also. And so Night Night Everyone is just a provocation to to challenge that notion and to take universal responsibility for others' well-being. It's been really interesting, the reactions to the project. They're sort of on two sides. Some people love it, civilized, insane, sort of a bold idea, and others just can't imagine this sort of kind of nanny state, control over individuals. But, I've been thrilled with some of the new iOS improvements and these other types of controls that are acknowledging the detrimental nature of some of the engines we've built to capture attention, and that there are these trade-offs for well-being that have to be understood. So taking universal responsibility, I think, is a really interesting way to look at our designs and the things we're putting out into the world. The last one I want to share with you is the idea of grand priorities. So once we're considering everything, the entirety of the system, and we're taking universal responsibility for all of our impacts in that system, then we start to see priorities emerge. Why am I working on this problem when this problem exists over here? And why would this even be a concern if there's something else to address? We see this a lot in health, where a specialist might be trying to address a very narrow focus on, say, managing a certain protein level in someone's body. It's so focused on a particular metric. But actually, if you look at the entire individual in their entire life, you realize, it's actually the real problem, the grand priority here is managing a relationship with a family member that is creating stress, that is causing problems in the home, that is leading to a lack of opportunity to maybe follow clinical guidelines. That is causing the problem with this protein. So grand priority starts to look at the whole system, and our focus and our view changes. And one example of an intervention we've been playing with for the last few years is a project called Climate.studio. And this slide, whatever you're doing right now is probably not as important as addressing global warming, is an acknowledgement of these grand priorities. If we look at everything and look at what's on the table now, climate change is an existential threat to civilization and to humanity. And suddenly, with that frame, most of the work that we're doing is not interesting and not important, and not only that, is actually catastrophically contributing to the delay. Hi guys. Sorry about that. I'll jump in again. Let's see. So so this idea then that of this slide is that we include this slide in every presentation we do, regardless of the project that we're working on, in every final report that we deliver. And every talk that I give, I include this slide as well. So it doesn't matter what I'm talking about or what I'm addressing. It's an acknowledgement that these things are still interesting and important and urgent to the company organization we're working with, but they exist within this other context, and we have to constantly acknowledge that context. We've also, again, put a little snippet of code together so people can drop on the warming globe onto their websites to, again, make that acknowledgement. And I think we won't start to see movement in some of these spaces until we see these types of shifts. I won't talk about it tonight, but I'll just mention one other kind of project or exploration that I've been playing with is designing happiness. So as I was first developing these principles a number of years ago, I sort of realized that in my own life, what is the grand priority? Why do I undertake better, faster, stronger, any activity? I sort of realized, well, the ultimate, I do it because I believe by accomplishing this thing, I'll be better off, I'll be happier. And so I realized, well, why am I working at focusing on these middle goals? I should just design everything for my happiness. So we've created an organization, Masamichi Sozo, built on this premise that happiness is the ultimate priority, and that all basically design work should be focused with that as sort of the end goal. So those grand priorities kind of radically shift things. So what does it all mean? I think in terms of this, the topic for tonight in systems thinking, we saw this huge shift in the last 15 years as we realized that products can be benefited greatly by understanding the larger service system that they operate in, and the choreography of multiple touch points and interactions over time to create an experience. And we're now seeing the same shift as we realize actually services exist and work within these larger systems, and policy and health systems. It's sort of all of the problems we ran into as we were working on service projects. We realized they exist within systems, and we have opportunities to design those systems. So I believe there's a huge amount of value to be had from that. I would just add to that there is an everything that is beyond many of the ways that we define systems. And a radical push towards this, considering everything, is really interesting. And speculative design, then, I think has to become a normalized part of this process. This trip into the future, where we understand what could happen next, what are the knock-on effects, what are the implications of the choices we're making today and the emerging technology, for the future. By spending time out in the future and then returning to bring that understanding back into our current decision making becomes an absolutely essential part of all design activity, and a part of considering everything, a part of the explorations that need to happen. So it's my hope that everyone here begins to find, I guess, twofold. One, moves into that understanding of everything in their practice, and two, includes the future as part of those explorations. So, look to consider everything, look to take universal responsibility, and look to understand how your work fits into sort of a larger set of grand priorities. And I think some really interesting value begins to emerge. So those are the ideas I want to share with you. And again, these are emerging, and we're continuing to explore them. So definitely feel free to connect, and would love to kind of continue the conversation. So I'll stop there, and yeah, I would love to answer some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, J. Paul. You're getting lots of emoji reactions, and they're all positive. It doesn't look like anyone's cursing at you with the emojis.
Okay, so that's a good sign. Yeah, but feel free to curse too, because I do when I think about these ideas as well. So
you've given me a lot I'm excited to hear this presentation. This is a lot to chew on. There's one question for you in the Q&A, and then I think there's a lot of questions in chat in the chat that I'll try to parse, and or you can look at it as well. But I'll start with the question. See, it's cool. I can put it on the stage. Maybe it'll be addressed. But how does one avoid complete stasis or decision paralysis in attempting to consider the everything?
Yeah. So this is exactly what I experienced as I was coming across these ideas. Literally, kind of a depression. I couldn't figure out how to act. And what I've realized is it is impossible, but to consider everything. But the attempt is what's exciting. So while if you're in product, you move to service, there's value. If you move from service to system, there is value. And then if you go beyond system and you ask larger questions, you look at these grand priorities, there's more value to be explored there. So I think that the first thing I would just say is hold that tension. Just feel uncomfortable all the time with the circle that you've drawn around your project, and be asking, what is outside of this, and how does this connect to everything else going on in the world? And it's that frustration, I think, that will lead to interesting, or that tension that will lead to interesting ideas. So we can't consider everything. It can't work, but the attempt is valuable. I hope that kind of answers or kind of helps a little bit.
It's as an old mentor of mine used to tell me, embrace the chaos.
Embrace the chaos. Yeah, that's a great. It is with us, and it is the nature of the reality we're operating within. So we have to align, and that's a good way to look at it. I mean, a lot of our design and business practices just ignore it. they sort of turn a blind eye to it, and we're very happy with the way we measure things because they're incomplete and they don't acknowledge everything that's going on. So yeah, definitely embrace it.
And then I scrolled up in the chat I'm going to try and pull out the questions, unless there's anything else that you wanted to touch on first, but I'll try and pull out some of the questions.
That's great.
Someone had said, I'm almost, okay. Oh, sorry. Almost there. There's lots of chat.
No, that's great.
Someone had asked, does the new kind of design have a name, or maybe is new kind of design the working name?
Yeah, new kind of design is the working name, and it's a nod to, I mean, a very simplistic nod to new kind of science, which is Stephen Wolfram, the scientist who has sort of done a lot of work in computational irreducibility. And he actually suggested that our science is also ill-equipped, that most of our knowledge is generated in the lab, and that doesn't translate back into the real world. And so he's been working on a lot of interesting ways, cellular automaton and other approaches to try to understand complexity. Yeah, so new kind of design is the working title.
That's an interesting tethering. Another question was, this one was funny. Which calendar system does the night everyone function use? I think that was like a fun tie to Kalyani's presentation.
Yeah, that's a really good tie. We need to work on that. I'm really interested in these alternate times, and I think that's another. One of the reasons I love these is because our calendars don't consider everything. So, for example, I think about seasonal affect disorder, and I wonder sometimes, is that an actual disorder, or are we just our rhythms meant to sort of shut down and go slower in winter? And the tragedy is that we've got this sort of fixed working day, and we're supposed to have the same levels of energy throughout the entirety of the year. And so that's what's wrong. So I love these alternate models, and particularly ones that sort of acknowledge natural cycles like the sun, circadian rhythms, moon cycles, and others. But yeah, we'll need to integrate that further. We're probably respecting the current time models too much with night.
And then one more question, and then we'll I mean, this is a huge question, I guess, and it's a question that kind of got some responses in the chat too. But is climate change existential, or perhaps maybe we don't have the tech or the design capacity to address it yet? And then it looks like some some people had responded in the chat about it too. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah. So I would say it is absolutely an existential threat. That there is a possibility that humankind, as we survive and have lived for the last 80,000 years, modern man and woman on the planet, there's a real threat to how we operate. There absolutely to current society, and how we live now will not exist. And I think I maybe temper that a little. Current projections, it looks like we're headed towards 2 or 3 or 4 degrees warming. If we kind of follow through on some of these plans and commitments that have been put out now, we're avoiding the worst case of like 6 to 8 degrees and beyond. But I think still it's not looking good. It's really rough right now. And for example, I think in the last I know the new IPCC report just leaked, and it's really grim. But I remember the one from 2018, and they were talking about 500 million climate refugees. We had 6 million refugees from Syria here in Europe, and it was really difficult to handle just that amount of people coming into Europe. So now imagine the displacement of 500 million, in parts of the world where food supplies, and crop cycles are no longer sustained, food sources and food systems and ecosystems collapse. I mean, I think we'll survive, but I think the types of shifts that we're going to be asked to undergo are just overwhelming, and parts of the world becoming no longer tenable for sort of civilization as we experience it now. So I think there's a ridiculous urgency that is still not understood by the general population and is not reflected in our action. Even Biden, with some of his great, plans and proposals, it's like the first time we're seeing positive steps. It's still not ambitious enough when you talk to a lot of the scientists, and we're realizing the warming's even happening, faster than we were expected or projected just a few years ago. So yeah, sorry, that's a big one to kind of end on, but I think
it really is.
But
yeah.
I would just say that I would go back to that slide. Whatever you're working on is not as important as climate change, and an invitation to everyone in your work is to connect it to climate change. How do your projects, how do the work you're doing connect to improving public perception, allowing people to act, encouraging politicians to make science-aligned decisions in that space. Considering everything, taking universal responsibility and ground priorities suggests, some really exciting action in that direction. So I'll leave it there, but yeah, happy to connect with people, and I'll leave my contact details in the chat if people want to continue those conversations. So.